Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our second series of the Hub event today. My name is Jane Retimana from Payments New Zealand, and I'd like to welcome you to those of you that are joining us on the live stream this morning for a conversation about the challenge of data sharing in the new normal. This is, as I said, part two of a five-part series where we're bringing you some content and getting us all to think about navigating the new normal for payments. We've got over 450 people registered for our events, and we're really happy to be sharing this with you today and for the next 3 weeks. For those that are on the live screen, just to get started, the pop-out box that you're seeing me on, you can move that around, and you'll need to move that around for when we get to question times. Down on the navigation bar of the platform, you can ask questions, and I really encourage you to do that for our guest speakers today, who are both able and ready to answer your questions. I'd like to thank the Hub series sponsors today. Swift is our principal sponsor. Swift is all our sponsors actually are industry names, maybe not household names, but certainly well known in the payments and financial services industry. And Swift in particular are, as a principal sponsor, are a critical infrastructure provider to some of our core payment systems. ACI Worldwide again provide kind of meaty products and services into the back end of systems to help our payments and financial services systems stay up and running. Buddle Finlay, who are another series sponsor, provide exceptional legal advice and support and have done so to Payments New Zealand over many years. And the Middleware Group, who also power our API Centre sandbox, are there working on the cutting edge of technology and financial services or fintech. I'd like to run through our agenda today. We've got a pretty quick hour of the series today. We've got Miles Cheetham beaming in from the UK from Icebreaker One, and Miles has got a great background in open banking and now open energy. Then we'll have Glen Hildreth from MBIE along to talk to us about their consumer data right discussion document they've got out at the moment. And then we should be all done, closed and finished by 10 a.m. this morning. So without much more fanfare, I'd like to introduce Miles Cheetham, our first guest speaker today. Miles is beaming in from the UK. I think it's evening there or nighttime there now. Miles has been a key figure in the UK's open banking journey, and until recently he was the head of propositions at the open banking implementation entity, and in fact he held that position since OBIE's inception in 2016. He remains involved in open banking, and he helps lead the work on the Open Up Challenge that they ran earlier this year, which is about bringing greater innovation and competition to the retail banking market. Now he's working on Icebreaker One, and Miles will tell us a bit more about that. That's looking at open energy, using data to support open energy, and a move towards delivering a zero carbon future. So Miles has got heaps of experience to share with us today. He'll take us on a bit of a journey from what he's learned from open banking, share some of those Open Up Challenge use cases with us, and some of the ways our colleagues up in the UK are thinking about data use cases using open banking. And he'll also share with us some more information about the work he's doing on open energy, which is just fascinating. So I will now hand it over to Miles. Hi, Miles.
Hi, Jane, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's lovely to see you.
You too, and over to you now, Miles.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm Miles Cheetham. I've worked with open banking, as Jane said, for quite a few years now, and it has been an absolutely fascinating journey to go from basically a kind of blank sheet of paper and an order from the Competition and Markets Authority that we had to try to make sense of, and along the way to integrate that with the European Union's Second Payment Services Directive to deliver the kind of services that we can now see today in open banking, which is really starting to take off. So I'm going to give you a sort of whistle-stop tour into open banking, kind of show you a little bit about where it's been and where it's going, the use cases that we see emerge, and where I think the potential lies for the future, which is very exciting. It's not altogether without its challenges, and I'm going to pick up on some of the things that we can see, because I think one of the great things about having come so far on the journey is allows us to see a little further ahead as well. So I'm going to talk to you about some of those things that we've seen and some of the work I've been involved in there. So I'm going to start by looking at open banking as an ecosystem. The way that I see open banking, it is as much as an initiative, it is almost like a living, breathing thing. And we can see how, since opening up APIs and since introducing the standard in the UK, how almost in front of our eyes, an industry has started to form. It's been quite fascinating to see the shape of that industry. And it wasn't always the way we expected it to be. We've seen how actually, not only do you find companies that have applied through the Financial Conduct Authority to become either an account information service provider or a payment initiation service provider, and then gone on to connect into the banks. But also we've seen the emergence of a kind of wholesaling layer within that ecosystem, technology service providers who have the right authorizations from the bank and then are working with third parties in a kind of agency relationship, all under the regulatory umbrella. But what it allows is that you have this combination of those companies that have gone all the way quite early and got the right authorizations from the regulator, through to actually a myriad of smaller companies that exist on the edge that are in effect riding off the authorizations from these technology service provider companies. Companies like TrueLayer you may have heard of, or Plaid, or OpenWorks, and others like that. And I'll kind of fill you in on how that's shaping up in a moment. But the net result is that today, and the latest figures I had were, I think, 267 total number of companies in the ecosystem, hundreds queuing up behind that. And at the beginning of the year, we had 1 million customers using open banking. And I'm really pleased to say that today, Monday, our time, we announced in open banking that we've hit 2 million unique customers using open banking in 9 months. So there is definitely a trend towards this. It's accelerating despite all the challenges of this year. We can see that, that open banking is really starting to go into liftoff. Now, we've done this by basically building around customer needs. When we really started this journey, the first thing we asked ourselves was, what do people really want from this? What are the sort of gaps that we can see? What sort of use cases do we think we need to build for? And so everything that we did was built around that supposition. What are these use cases? In fact, we had a long list of something like 77 that we started with, which we whittled down to 8, around which we were able to define what our standards need to look like and what the architecture to support that needed to be, and so on. And this has given us a great platform for innovation. And within this growth that I'm describing, we're starting to see some incredible creativity. And I'm going to talk about some of those use cases at the moment. But actually, if I roll back 3 years or so, when we were starting out on this journey, and I was standing on stage talking about the types of things that we expected, not only have we seen those things, but actually we've seen things that we didn't really expect and that we're really happy to see emerge as a result of this. The net result from this has been not only societal benefit in terms of better products for customers, but also economic benefit. We've seen huge amount in 2019, a huge amount of investment in the fintech sector in London. Sorry, in the UK, not just London. And a lot of this has been driven by new investment in open banking enabled technologies. It's not exclusively that, but that is one of the drivers behind the whole thing. And really what we're seeing is another wave. I think of this as being another wave in the internet. So today, we're all very used to being able to access information, look at websites and so on. In fact, I think what we're seeing is the first step in the emergence of another layer, which is really around the data that we can share. So in this case, we're talking about financial data from your bank, but there are many other use cases, which I'll talk about later. But there is, I think, something pretty fundamental which is going on here. So let's think about the use cases. Let me kind of paint a picture of what's going on. You can see from my screen there that I've put up a few things there, and I've given them some headers so you can see the type of use case that we're talking about. The ones that I've highlighted in blue are things specifically that we've seen through the Open Up 2020 Challenge, which is a fintech competition that I've been responsible for managing over the last year, and which is just about to come to an end. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I think what I would say about this unbelievable amount of creativity in the market is that we've seen that third-party providers, once they've set themselves up and once they've started to understand really what their customers want, they work so quickly. They do a test and learn. They work in very much an agile manner. And they're able to put things out into the market, test them, see what kind of response comes back, tweak them, and then keep moving them on. So there's a real kind of test, learn, iterate type of model that's emerged. In some cases, they have moved so quickly that they have literally put things together over a weekend. So for example, when the COVID crisis happened, one of the first things that a group of third parties did was get together collectively and think about how they might be able to produce much faster affordability checks for businesses that were applying for some of the emergency loans that were being announced by the government at the time. And they literally did that over a weekend, and they did it by allowing direct access into the small business's bank account, so that for the purpose of doing an affordability check and to prove eligibility for the funds that they were looking for from the UK Treasury. So they can move incredibly fast. And this, to me, is almost Darwinian in its principle. It means that these third-party providers are able to test things, move on, keep moving, work out the things that are really successful. Of course, a lot of them, ultimately, the smaller businesses won't make it, but some really are, and some are really getting traction, and some are really starting to pile on numbers like you've never seen. It is quite extraordinary to watch all of this. So you're getting into a world where not only are they learning about customers, but they're now applying technology, particularly AI, that is really driving out very, very deep insights. And the best way that I can describe this is that I was in a meeting down at the FCA about 18 months or so ago, and we were actually talking about the small business market. And one of the people on that panel said, well, what's interesting about this is that these particular types of use cases are beginning to get to a point where they know you better than your bank manager. And in the UK, there is something of a dearth of bank managers for the small business marketplace. You have to go to a local hub. It's not like the old days of 25 years ago, where your local bank manager knew you, knew your family, and kind of knew everybody in the community. It is bringing a level of insight into the small business market, which is quite remarkable, and really helping people to understand more about their businesses, more about their cash flow, more about the correct type of funding, for example, for their business, not just about loans, but also about understanding if invoice discounting or even an equity investment might be a better bet for them. So tremendous amount of insight coming there. We are seeing at the moment kind of a landscape which is rather dominated by account information. The first movers have all been account information service providers. Now we're starting to see payments really take off. And I expect that 2020 is a year where we'll start to see some significant movement for payments providers. The next 12 months or so, we're going to see very interesting use cases coming up for payments, not least of the UK government, which is starting to embrace all these. The HMRC have just put out a tender for £3 million for somebody to come up with solution that works across HMRC's the revenue and customers use cases. So saving them money, meaning that it's much faster, much more information provided, and reconciliation of information at the HMRC end. And what this is starting to do, in fact, is redefine the customer relationship. People are now starting to associate with these third-party providers, perhaps more so than their own banks. Some of the names that are starting to emerge, particularly in the younger generation and sort of the kind of millennials and so on, they are now starting to think about these new generation third-party providers in exactly the same way as we perhaps thought about banks when we were younger. Well, certainly I was younger. Which leads me on to what's happening with Open Up 2020. So this is a fintech competition which actually we launched in the middle of last year. It's been running since November last year, and all of these names that you see up here are finalists in that competition. There's been some really, really interesting use cases that have emerged here. I'll just touch on one or two of them. I think you'll have got the gist of where we're going because you've seen that previous slide. But I want to call out Toucan and I want to call out Calgira, because those two have both come up with solutions that allow for people who perhaps need extra care when managing their finances. Somebody perhaps who has dementia and who wants a relative or a carer to keep an eye on them can actually provide that person with, in effect, a kind of warning service. If something unexpected happens on a bank account, then that can be notified to a carer or to a relative and can stop something from happening that might otherwise have been troublesome, and means that for people who suffer from mental health problems or who are trying to maintain their independence through older age, have got a support mechanism which is automated, which is easy for them to use and easy for their carers to use. And these are the kind of things which I find particularly gratifying. Not just that, but people being able to apply for mortgages far more easily, even if they have a thin credit file. Being able to round up their savings, being able to build up a kind of nest egg so they have much greater financial resilience, a whole raft of things that we're beginning to see. I would say really worthwhile having a look at this. We're going to, the judging panel actually for this is tomorrow and Wednesday. And you'll see an announcement about this in about the first week of October, but you'll see some of those companies. Worthwhile having a look at this particular website. I've included the address there, and you'll see and get a feel for some of these really interesting solutions. I want to touch about customer experience a little bit. This is one of the things which has been a challenge. So we discovered quite early on that customer journey is really essential in all of this. You know, particularly things like app to app, which is fundamental for people who are digital natives. There's a really important issue here, which is that in some cases, you know, there is a little too much friction, there's too much information, there are too many steps in the journey and so on. And we had to work really closely with the banks in the UK to help to get this to become much easier, much more frictionless type of customer journey, but one in which we got the balance right between imparting the right level of information, creating trust, and keeping it secure, so that you kind of met every dimension of the requirements. It is very much a kind of balancing act between regulation and customer experience, and actually requires quite a lot of thinking about. So these customer experience guidelines published on the Open Banking website, I've shared the link at the end of these slides. Really, if you're interested in this space, do go and have a look. They are critical for anybody going down this road to make sure that they get this aspect right. It's kind of fundamental in driving usage. But further to that, and I mentioned about sort of having gone quite a long way on this customer journey and try to understand what lies ahead of us. We've been involved in some work, and I led a report earlier in the year and co-authored a report with some of my colleagues, one on consent, one on liability. And this is a fundamental area that we really need to work on. I can simplify the consent question very easily. It is, all of us know that feeling where we've literally just scrolled to the bottom when we're setting up a new service or a new app and clicked agree, and we've never read the terms and conditions. We've never paid attention to the privacy notice as it's served. We've basically just agreed to something without really knowing fully what we've agreed to. And that then has ramifications for how your data is used across what are becoming quite complex provisioning chains. As this industry starts to develop, we're finding multiple parties in it, people being creative, which is fantastic, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the right consumer protections are in place, and that everybody understands their obligations and those are implemented properly. It needs to be something where the value exchange between the consumer and the business are very, very clear. Now, that doesn't always happen. We are trying to think about how best to address those type of things and how, in fact, we make sure that people making informed decisions around the consent they're granting, and they are always in control of those the data. So these two reports are actually available through the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and they set out our thoughts about how we need to develop better consumer protections, what lies ahead of us next, and the areas for particularly regulatory intervention in order to make sure that consumers never lose faith in what we're doing, and that as an industry and as regulators, everybody tries to make sure that the consumer is front of mind in all of this. That's going to become even more critical as we start to get into other sectors. I'm already starting to work in energy. There are other initiatives going on which I'll touch on in a moment. But we need to make sure that these are areas which are well thought through and consistent, so that customers always know exactly that they're in charge of and in control of their data. So where are we going next with all of this? Well, I see some massive benefits ahead. In finance, already we are developing well in the UK into insurance, pension, savings, and so on. I think that's all a given. That all sits under the Open Finance banner. The UK smart data initiatives are now starting to focus on telecoms. The initial emphasis there is about getting people better deals and making sure they have the right coverage in their locality, those kind of things, and being able to make more informed decisions about your choice of provider. I'm leading a team on open energy. In particular, what I'm doing is I'm working in an Innovate UK small business research initiative. It's a competition, and we have designed a method of unlocking data across the energy ecosystem. So this is all about data moving to the edge. You're all familiar with the move to electric vehicles and solar panels, local generation of energy. A big problem that exists in that is that trying to get the right data which allowed you to balance that energy against the energy generated in the national grid is a fundamental problem. It also goes right down to household level, where you start to encounter the same kind of issues around personal data as we've found in open banking. But the prize is absolutely huge. It can unlock enormous amounts of efficiency. The challenge is that today, if we have too much energy being generated from renewables, let's say it's a particularly windy day in the north of the UK, there's a lot of energy out there. It tends to be that we switch that energy off because it's easier than switching off energy which is perhaps being generated from gas power stations. And that's obviously the wrong way around, needs to be sorted. But there is a massive prize to be had from unlocking that data. And it uses the same infrastructure as open banking. It could be completely repurposed. I know the same is true in transport. So I have been in discussions recently with the UK government, the Office for Electric Vehicles. So I know some of the challenges that are coming up there. We can easily join the dots much more easily if we have data, so that people make the right transport choices, understand the benefits, and can be in effect nudged to take decisions which are cheaper, better for them, and release less carbon than currently. So there's a huge win to be had there in the transport sector. and an even bigger one potentially, which is around understanding the supply chain from end to end. There's some very interesting work going on in the European Commission to understand non-financial reporting and exactly how you could understand everything in the supply chain, literally from the moment something's mined from the ground to the moment in which it's disposed of or recycled. And if you can understand that better, then you can get much greater clarity around the carbon impact of any particular product. That in itself could make a massive change to the way we think about production and the choices that large corporations make, in particular in their production, and the kind of the downstream effect from that carbon reduction. So that kind of covers what I wanted to say this evening. Now we're into Q&A. So Jane.
Typical, just fell for the, you are muted, the 3 keywords of 2020, I think, and working on these platforms. I was just saying we probably could have used a little bit of maybe more transport data this morning for those of us living in Auckland, and our harbour bridge got shut. Actually, I'm quite keen to wait for flying cars, probably was the only solution to this morning, or of course this type of Zooming. We've got a couple of questions, a bit slow coming through, so send your questions because Miles is here for another 5 minutes or so. I had a question and a thank you actually to Miles, who helped us with our own customer experience guidelines for our API centre. In terms of advice to us, Miles, and our journey, you know a little bit about our API centre journey here in New Zealand. In terms of putting the customer at the front of mind with our journey, any kind of advice to us for an industry-led initiative and kind of where we need to be thinking kind of over the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, so I think there is a kind of fundamental thing which is going on with the consumer, which is that people are really becoming much wiser about use of their personal data. I think it's a kind of general thing. People have been alarmed by some of the things they've seen in, for example, Cambridge Analytica is always cited as a good example, and they're slightly concerned about the direction this is taking. That's why I have put a lot of emphasis on clarity around consent, the setup journey, the authentication process and so on, and really explaining at every stage in the journey everything that a customer needs to know. Now, it's not easy because actually there's an awful lot of information to impart. So this is where you need really skilled UX designers to make sure that it's presented in the right way, and you can use lots of techniques, sort of icons and layering and things like that. But the trick is to try to make sure that we get a balance between ensuring the customer's properly informed and the information is provided at the right time, but not overburdening them with stuff. And it is difficult to get that right. I must admit there's been a lot of head scratching. Where we've landed with it in the UK, I think is a reasonable balance. And the Open Banking Implementation Entity are doing a lot of work, including a consultation at the moment around consent management. But I think this figures pretty high on the list of things that absolutely have to be right.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got a few questions here. And we've got a few ticks for this one. So considering, I assume as in New Zealand's, considering our history of being early adopters of payments tech, do you think we have been slow to unlock the possibilities of open banking? And if so, what do you think is holding us back? I assume that's in a New Zealand context. Or maybe in a general context.
Well, at the moment, I don't think you've missed an awful lot. Payment initiation has not really taken off quickly in the UK nor in Europe. I think the challenge for it is that the regulation as it stands only takes things so far, and there's been an awful lot of work done in the UK to understand exactly what needs to happen, particularly around things like variable recurring payments and those kind of things. You know, a straightforward payment initiation service is good for some use cases, is not necessarily good for all. However, that is about to change. The combination of you know, evolution of the regulation, forward-looking regulators, creativity will start to really change that over the next few years. So no, I don't think you are behind the curve, if that's the question. I think you're probably, because you're even asking the question, it shows you're in the right space. And I expect that actually over the next few years, we'll start to see some fundamental changes and a lot of growth in this space.
Thank you. What were your key issues, roadblocks with the regulator in the UK when establishing OBIE, and what can New Zealand potentially learn from your experience?
Well, I don't really think we had any roadblocks. I mean, there was a time where I was down at the FCA literally every week for a couple of hours on a Friday morning, and you know, they were tremendously willing to roll up their sleeves and very helpful. And we had a lot of assistance from the regulator. No roadblocks. Sometimes we had discussions, fairly robust discussions about some aspects of the regulation and the way that they should be implemented. But no roadblocks, not at a working level. You know, they were very helpful. And I think the FCA has done an awful lot. That's the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, has done an awful lot to ensure that that this all works really well.
Okay. A question here, given where we are in New Zealand, would you, if you could, what are the things you'd wish you'd done differently in the UK that we can learn from?
Good question. So I think personally, I wish we had brought more focus to the customer experience earlier than we did. We really started to work on customer experience after about 15 months. I wish we'd have really thought about those customer experience guidelines a little earlier than that. What we did is we published some voluntary guidance to start with, and then we realized actually it really wasn't hitting the spot and it needed much more thought, particularly explaining the regulatory requirements and how to balance those against customer experience. So, you know, with hindsight, I wish we'd done that sooner, but we were on a journey. So we didn't realize that until it kind of hit us straight in the face. But, you know, we've done that. I would encourage you in New Zealand to really put that high on your agenda of things that you need to do. Yeah,
thank you. And we have taken your advice in the API Centre. We have known Miles for some time, so
we have been
gleaning as much advice from you as possible. There's another question here. Have there been any issues with liability, assuming there have been disputes? Or have there been any disputes?
No, I'm not aware. So no, I'm not aware of any. We so Open Banking have put in place a dispute management system. But it's early days, and I think one of the questions that needs to be resolved is, where does liability lie? If going back to those papers that we published earlier in the year, they're worth reading because it really kind of goes to the heart of that. What we're asking is, how do you define where that liability lies, and what does it mean for the customer? Because at the moment, certainly under UK and European regulation, there is, to my mind at least, a gap, which is that you may suffer some horrendous consequential loss because of a data breach. The best that you can do is that the company could be fined quite substantially under the General Data Protection Regulation. But as a consumer, you have to apply to the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the data regulator in the UK, for a ruling, and then you have to take that ruling and go to court and sue that person. So it's a long-winded, very difficult process. Now, to my way of thinking, that's wrong. I don't think most people will ever do it. They'll just end up having to kind of shoulder the loss themselves. So I think that's an area of regulation that really needs to be looked at. But I've given you the kind of the 2-second version. It's worthwhile having a look at that report.
Yeah, thank you. And I did see another question here about kind of along the similar lines. When things have gone wrong, who does the finger get pointed at? I think it goes to that liability issue, and I'm not sure if it's the same answer, but is it pointing towards banks,
well,
the fintechs, or the...
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about this, I mean, we're talking about data rather than payments. Payments is easy because it's all regulated. It's very clear. There's no ifs and buts about that. You know, if something goes wrong, it's not hard to work it out. It's all there. It's all covered. It's the data side of things which needs to, where we need greater clarity, in my opinion. But I'm not aware of anything specifically in the open banking space. It's just very much on our minds.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. What, if any, has been the impact on making the financial services market more competitive? Have the objectives been attained?
So, this is my opinion. I think that open banking is well on the way to meeting the objectives of the Competition Markets Authority order. At the moment, open banking is still in what's called its implementation phase. In other words, you know, it is not fully formed, and there's still work going on, and there's a roadmap that runs for quite a few months ahead to kind of finish that work. But from where I'm sitting, I think it's really on course to make a big difference, to really improve the quality and variety of services that are offered to the consumer. And it will in turn force all of the retail banks to really think hard about their own customer experience and the services and so on that they offer. So it will definitely raise the bar all around. And we see that starting to happen, as I alluded in my first slide.
Yeah, and it's and I suppose it's a reflection of the year which you touched on, but that you've gone from 1 million customers using open banking enabled services at the beginning of the year to 2 million customers today.
Yeah.
And is that all mainly in the kind of established, I know you've got an acronym for them, but third parties? Is that, you know, have there been a lot of new third parties coming in and offering those services, which has bumped it up, or more people coming on to existing ones?
It's a mix of both, Jane. I mean, I can tell you that from my own experience in the Open Up 2020 challenge, we've seen some of those businesses there, and I can't give away anything because they're all got to go through the judging panel over the next couple of days. But some of those businesses have really done very, very well. They've really started to scale substantially, and a lot of that has actually been driven by COVID. In some cases, COVID has had a negative effect, but in other areas, yeah, it's had quite a strong effect. You know, particularly for people looking, let's say, to try to build their financial resilience or to get debt advice and so on. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, but there are definitely some, I think, some really interesting businesses that are starting to scale as a result. Yeah.
And with your, as a last question, with your crystal ball, what does open banking look like over the next 24 months?
So I'm convinced we're going to see some very rapid growth in payment initiation. I think that's now starting to mature, and there'll be some very interesting services there. I think that the pace of growth will start to pick up even further. You know, I think that there will be many more entrants. I think we'll see strong growth in the number of companies that are authorized and offering services based on the open banking standard, and a kind of a growing realization within the consumer market that these value-added services can do tremendous benefit for people. You know, there are some super services out there that people will start to really recognise as household names, and I think we'll start to see some of those really get traction over the next couple of years or so.
Yeah, well, let's absolutely hope so. Well, thank you, Miles, for being with us this morning. All the best to you, and also to your work on open energy. That sounds fascinating. And I think when we put your slides up, I think you might have had your contact details there, but if not, you may get inundated with LinkedIn requests from Kiwis wanting to connect and pick your brain a bit more. So thank you so much for being with us. Stay well in these unusual times, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jane, and it's been a pleasure to be here, and have a good day, everybody. Look me up on LinkedIn. Very happy to chat.
Okay.
Thanks
you. Thanks so much, Miles. Okay, thank you for staying with us. And next up, we've got Glen Hildreth, who is the Senior Policy Advisor in the Competition and Consumer Policy team at MBIE, and he is leading MBIE's consumer data right work. So Glen is going to talk us through a bit about that discussion document, what that process is, what they're thinking about. That is open until, I think it just got extended, which Glen will share with us till the 19th of October. And so Glen is here, and keep your questions coming for Glen. Hi, Glen.
Hey Jane, and hi everyone. So thanks for having me today. It's nice to be able to be here in this kind of weird virtual conference to talk to you all. So yeah, as Jane's mentioned, we released a discussion document last month, just basically calling for submissions on whether or not New Zealand needs a consumer data right. Now, I guess we see a consumer data right as a kind of a statutory right for consumers and businesses that will give them greater choice and control of their data by allowing them to securely share it with trusted third parties. So I guess obviously this topic isn't new to anyone, and we've just heard from Miles about the UK experience, and there's been discussions about open banking and kind of data portability more generally for a number of years now. So I guess businesses across the economy hold really large volumes of data now, and other businesses are finding new and innovative ways to use that data. I heard Miles just talk about Cambridge Analytica, so obviously there's some controversial examples of consumer data being used, but I think for the most part, these are generally being used to benefit consumers. And I guess in short, they give consumers a better access to a wider range of products that meet their needs. I mean, one example in New Zealand is, hopefully you're all aware of this, but it's really rather easy now to plug your electricity usage data into a platform, and it can then tell you, and you give it your address, and then it can tell you the best kind of plan or most affordable plan for you. That's just, I guess, one local example of how this can be used. In the finance and banking sectors, obviously this won't be news to anyone, but there are obviously a range of different products and services that use data to help consumers. So these include platforms that help you kind of multi-home your products, help people save and invest, and other ones that can help people manage finances. And I saw one of Miles had a slide which quite clearly showed how these different offerings exist and where they sit in the sphere. So I guess there's been quite a lot of progress in New Zealand, particularly the work of the API Centre in developing those kind of shared standards that can be used. I think it's fair to say progress has been relatively slow. We haven't seen a lot in the way of implementation, so consumers aren't really realising the benefits of all of this work. Meanwhile, the government's been reconsidering kind of its role in this space. I think to date, we've been focused on making sure that our regulatory settings aren't acting as a barrier to innovation in this space, and that we are making sure that government effectively kind of gets out of the way and lets the industry solve these things. I guess now, in part due to the kind of relative lack of progress and a number of barriers that we've identified, we think that that probably needs to be reconsidered, which has brought us to the release of this discussion document now. The challenges we're facing aren't new, I should say as well. I mean, we heard a little bit about the UK experience this morning, but around the world, there are a number of different jurisdictions who have sought to improve consumers' access to data through different ways. So obviously in the UK, the focus was on open banking, and now they're thinking more broadly than that. The EU, their focus was on establishing like a blanket kind of almost philosophical right to your data through its GDPR. And in Australia, the focus was more on, I guess, building an interoperable data sharing economy through its consumer data right. So the Australian focus, while open banking's been kind of first cab off the rank there, feel that they were thinking about what might be next in this kind of data economy. I guess in New Zealand, we are in the advantageous position of being able to look at what's happened abroad, what other jurisdictions have done, what's worked, what might not have worked, what lessons they've taken, and we can take all that information and use it in helping design a consumer data right that's right for New Zealand. So our discussion document, it sets out our initial thinking on some of the barriers that we've found, which we may think may be inhibiting development in kind of data sharing. We've set out the benefits, costs, and risks we think there will be, at least at a high level, in establishing a consumer data right. And we've identified a few kind of main ways that a consumer data right could be designed. The discussion document itself, it really boils down to 3 key questions. So does New Zealand need a consumer data right? If so, how should a consumer data right be designed? And then what are the kind of key components that a consumer data right needs in order for it to be effective? So ultimately, we think giving consumers greater choice and control of their data will improve consumer welfare, and it provides significant benefits for growing the economy. It could help make it easier for consumers to compare different products, seamlessly switch between different providers. To use my earlier example of the electricity price comparison website, I think currently you can compare different product pricing, but then you're required to go and open an account on your own. So a consumer data right could be designed in such a way that you can immediately share all of your data with this platform, find the cheapest, most affordable plan for you, hit apply, and it will take care of it all for you. It could even close your previous account for you as well if you instructed it to do so. I guess that this, in terms of the other benefits it could have for consumer welfare, we think that as businesses develop new and innovative tools and ways that people can compare and switch different products, it will lead to greater competition, which we heard Miles talk a little bit about before as well. And ultimately, this competition will drive further innovation and lower prices for consumers. We think that as businesses use more innovative tools and innovative solutions for consumers, it will help to embed the use of data through the economy and help sectors such as the fintech sector to really thrive. And in time, that will be extended to potentially other sectors out there. Also, for businesses, we think a consumer data right could equally apply to a business. And so I think it will help those businesses, particularly small businesses, really improve their productivity if they're able to use a platform to manage their finances a lot more easily, pay tax, pay accounts, et cetera, et cetera. And for businesses who currently hold data, this could open up entirely new customer bases for them. So as set out in our discussion document, our initial thinking is that in order to fully realise these benefits, a sectoral designation model similar to that used in Australia is probably the best approach. So this would involve establishing a legislative framework that can be applied in time to certain sectors or markets through a designation process. The legislation itself could provide for shared standards or rules to be developed for third parties and other data recipients to be accredited. And it could clarify some of those tricky commercial issues that I know a lot of you are thinking about at the moment, such as pricing, which can be problematic. So from our perspective, this approach could address some of those barriers that we've identified while building something that is hopefully future-proofed as much as possible. It will allow much of the detail, including how a sector is defined and those barriers around what, if we use the banking sector for an example, what is the banking sector? What businesses within that sector would be caught by the right, and what data sets would be caught by the right. That can all be developed in time in consultation with the sector. And these can be adjusted over time if the need arises. So we think that this will eventually lead to a number of different interoperable open sectors across the economy that can talk to each other. And I mean, Miles provided a few different examples, including energy and telco, that in time, those could be the kind of sectors that we look to designate as well and become part of this kind of open, I don't want to say open economy, but I'm going to say open economy because I'm having a mind blank. I guess at the moment, we are really only beginning to understand the potential uses of data, and the fact that some countries are slightly ahead of us in this space, I think is quite useful because we can think about what do we need to build now in order for it to work in the future. And I think it's really, really helpful that we are in this space. We think that setting up a framework and law now that establish this right but can be tailored to the needs of individual sectors will be really useful. And we'll make sure that we can really realize those outcomes. Now, we're not under any false illusions that this is going to be easy. I mean, over the past few months since our discussion document was published, I've talked to a bunch of you, and I guess the general vibe from the meeting so far is that this is a massive opportunity. It will provide massive benefits to New Zealand consumers and businesses, but it is big. It's a big piece of work, and it's really important to get right. We've also heard, I guess, some questions about what does it mean for work that's underway, such as the work of the API Centre now. I guess our message at the moment is that the kind of consumer data right we envisage is one that can wrap around or build on top of whatever work in industry has already done. So we're not interested in kind of completely coming out and requiring any work that's been done to be turfed out entirely. If the industry can build a consumer data right or get some sort of data portability that's working for consumers, then that's great. That's the kind of outcome we want. There probably is a role for government in any event, clarifying some issues around liability, which I heard Miles cover before, potentially accreditation, and perhaps some of those kind of niggly commercial issues that we were talking about. So there probably is a role for government, but we're not interested in a kind of dogmatic top-down approach to this. We want to see consumers being able to use their data. That's our kind of our ultimate aim. I think that's about all that I have to cover. Happy to take any questions that there are. Before I do, just want to make a quick plug. Please make a submission. Obviously, a lot of you will be feeding into different submissions and probably various different submissions, but the more people we hear from, the better. You don't need to make a full formal submission. Even if you just drop us an email, that would be really helpful. Submissions close, as Jay mentioned. I think it's on October the 19th now. It turns out that school holidays are a thing that I don't need to know about yet. So we've pushed it out due to that. And obviously the earlier re-emergence of COVID and the lockdown that I know was a bit of a disruption for a lot of people. So you've got another 3 weeks or thereabouts. So yeah, please do make a submission. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Glenn. And I think the 19th of October is also after the second Bledisloe Cup match and the general election. So
and the election, yeah, that's right.
It will be an interesting day what you get through.
So you can make a submission on the Friday, I should say, as well, if you'd rather watch the footy and go vote.
Yeah. We have a few questions through. How do you protect the vulnerable individuals with their data? Hold on. Sorry, I'll reread that. How do you protect the vulnerable individuals where their data highlights risks that result in individuals being denied insurance, healthcare, banking, etc.?
That's quite a specific example that I haven't come across that issue yet. Yeah, I mean, there are issues that we're going to need to work through that we haven't either come across yet or haven't done thinking about yet. I guess that is a potential risk. I guess what we're talking about is the ability to use data and kind of relatively narrow data sets of consumers. We have thought about concerns around, I guess, the shortcomings of a consent model, that for vulnerable consumers, a consent might not be the most effective approach, even for non-vulnerable consumers. I mean, we all tick the terms and conditions on our phone anytime we download a new app, right? So I think consent itself isn't the solution to this, but we are aware of, I guess, the shortcomings of that in terms of vulnerable consumers. It is, I think in the discussion document, I have a feeling that we have asked a specific question, now that my brain started working, around how we can protect vulnerable consumers or those with accessibility issues, both from I guess, a digital divide kind of access, as well as if someone's blind, for example, how can we make sure consumer data right, or that allows for platforms that can help consumers with particular access issues. So it is something we're aware of, and if you've got any thoughts, then please get in touch. We'll make a submission.
Put in a submission, yeah.
Please.
And I think particularly, I would think the financial services side of things would be particularly interested in. Obviously, as this progressed, working with you, you mentioned the opening and closing of accounts, which would be interesting, and a lot of kind of compliance issues to be worked through on that type of right to access, and I suppose that's where vulnerable customers could also come into that. So in terms of your approach, and I think you have shared this, Glenn, do you see that as this progresses, or it being quite a collaborative process with all the different sectors and I would think multi-agency and regulators, because it kind of can be so big that it will touch on so many things.
Yeah, totally. I've been amazed by the people who have got in touch since our discussion document was published, and even beforehand, we were talking to, even with an MBIE, about 15 different teams that have an interest in this one way or another. We're definitely keen to do further consultation. We aren't going to get everything right in this particular round. This was a more, I guess, a bit of an initial scoping kind of stage. We've talked to a lot of people over the last little while. We'll definitely be doing more consultation, particularly as the more detailed kind of second and third tier issues start getting worked through.
Yeah, and we've just quickly got one last question before we finish.
Cool.
Why do you think progress has been slow in New Zealand, particularly in terms of implementation?
I think it's fair to say that there's probably a few issues. There are commercial reasons why people who currently hold data might not want to release that data. So there's kind of commercial incentives. On the commercial side of things as well, there's potentially issues around pricing that we've heard concerns about. So I might be able to access data, but as a fintech, for example, but I might get priced out of the market and might not be able to actually kind of buy the access to that data. We've heard concerns around the need for fintechs and others to have bilateral arrangements with every different provider whom they want to access data from. So that is obviously big and timely and costly. And on the other side of the fence, people who currently hold data might not want to release it because they might be concerned about privacy considerations. They might not, I guess, trust the third party to maintain security of that data. So I guess there are a bunch of different reasons. I guess it's also fair to say as well, the finance sector has gone through quite a lot of change in the last few years. There's been a lot of different regulatory changes, and we don't underestimate the impact that would have had on businesses.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. We've run out of time. There were some more questions there, so maybe we can get those through to you and see if we can get some answers on those. But
cool, yeah,
absolutely.
So please to get in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And really encourage everyone to get your submissions in by the 19th of October or maybe the Friday before, depending on what you want to do that weekend. So thanks, Glenn. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in live today. This video will be uploaded tomorrow morning, and then you can watch it again or you can share it with your colleagues, let people know. Again, we'll put up the presentations, everything tomorrow morning. Next Tuesday, so for the next 3 Tuesdays, 9 a.m, tune in for the next 3 episodes of the Hub series. And once again, thank you so much to our sponsors, Swift, ACI Worldwide, Buddle Finlay, and the Middleware Group. Thank you so much for your continued support. And everyone have a fantastic day. I hope the sun shines down on you. I think it's come out in Auckland a little bit at the moment. And yeah, have a great day, have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Bye.